My own mother told me I would never amount to anything in business. She said it at my older brother's engagement party, out loud, in front of his future in-laws, in front of the catering staff, in front of everyone. I was 27 years old, holding a glass of sparkling water because I couldn't afford to drink that night, and she looked me dead in the eye and said it like she was doing me a favor, like honesty was the same thing as cruelty. That was 5 years ago. Last month, the Wall Street Journal ran my company on the front page of the business section. The headline called me the woman quietly reshaping how America rents. My company, Landmark Collective, had just closed a $1.8 billion acquisition of a regional property management chain. The same chain my family had been trying to do business with for 6 years without success. I didn't call anyone when it happened. I didn't need to. My aunt sent me a screenshot of the article at 6:43 in the morning with 3 question marks and no other text. That was enough. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You need to understand what that engagement party actually felt like before you understand why the WSJ headline meant what it meant. My brother got engaged in April 5 years ago. He was 32. His fiancée came from old money. Her family had been in commercial real estate in the Southeast for 3 generations, and the party was held at their lake house in Georgia. I drove 4 hours to be there. I wore the nicest dress I owned, which I'd bought at a consignment shop in Asheville for $22. I told myself no one would notice. My mother noticed immediately. She didn't say anything about the dress at first. She was busy being charming, being the mother of the groom-to-be, making sure everyone understood that our family was a serious family. My father had built a small chain of hardware stores across western North Carolina, nothing grand but solid. My brother had joined the business straight out of college. He was being groomed to take over. I had gone a different direction. I had a degree in urban planning, a part-time job with a non-profit housing organization, and an idea that had been living in my head for 3 years that I had not yet told anyone about. The idea was simple, which is probably why I thought no one would take it seriously. There was a massive inefficiency in the mid-tier rental market in mid-size American cities, the cities that weren't New York or LA or Chicago, the cities that real estate technology companies ignored because the margins looked thin on paper. I believed those margins were wrong. I believed they were wrong because I had spent 2 years analyzing vacancy data and lease renewal rates in cities like Raleigh, Chattanooga, Richmond, and Boise, and I could see something that the big firms couldn't. The turnover costs were eating the profit. And the turnover was happening because property management was terrible, and the property management was terrible because no one had built the right software. I was going to build the software. I hadn't told my family because I knew what they would say. I had a sense, but I underestimated how publicly they would say it. We were at dinner, long tables on the lawn, string lights overhead, the kind of evening that looks beautiful in photographs and feels like pressure when you're living it. My future sister-in-law's father was asking everyone at the table what they did. He was being polite, making the rounds. When he got to me, I said I worked in housing. He asked what that meant. I said I was developing a property technology platform focused on mid-market residential management. There was a pause. My mother, who was sitting 4 seats down, turned and said, "And I want to be precise here because I have replayed this moment more times than I can count," she said. She means she works for a non-profit and has a hobby she thinks is a business. We keep telling her to come help her father and brother, but she has ideas. She said the word ideas the way you'd say delusions. My future sister-in-law's father gave a polite smile and moved on. My brother looked at his plate. My father put his hand over my mother's and said nothing, which was his way of approving without being accountable for approving. I excused myself to use the bathroom. I stood in the lake house powder room for 4 minutes, looking at my own face in the mirror, deciding something. I decided I was done asking for their belief. I was going to build this thing alone, in silence, and I was not going to tell them a single word until the numbers made the conversation irrelevant. I drove back to Asheville the next morning. My partner, whose name is Ren, we had been together for 2 years. She worked in tech consulting and understood both the opportunity and the risk. She was awake when I got home at midnight. I sat on the kitchen floor because sometimes that's where the real conversations happen. I told her everything. The whole plan, the data, the model, the software architecture I had sketched out on a legal pad over 18 months. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things about her that I have never taken for granted. When I was done, she asked one question: "How much do you need to start?" I told her $45,000. It was the number I had calculated down to the month, 6 months of runway, enough to build a minimum viable product and get in front of property managers in 2 test cities. She said, "I have 30 from my savings. We can find the other 15. We found it through a small business credit union that worked with women entrepreneurs." The loan officer was a woman named Beverly. I almost used her name here, but she deserves her privacy, who read my entire business plan in front of me and said it was the most thorough first application she had seen in 11 years at that job. We had $45,000 and a plan. What I did not have was any expectation that my family would ever find out, until I was ready for them to find out. The first year was a particular kind of hard that's difficult to describe to anyone who hasn't lived it. Ren and I were both working. She kept her consulting clients to pay our rent. I kept 3 shifts a week at the nonprofit to maintain health insurance. And we were building Landmark Collective in every remaining hour. I was doing the product design, the market research, the sales outreach, the bookkeeping. I taught myself enough about software to communicate with the 2 developers I eventually hired on contract, a woman in Pittsburgh and a man in Phoenix, both of whom I paid through payment plans because that was all I could offer. We launched our first pilot in Raleigh in February, 8 months after the engagement party. 14 property managers agreed to test the platform. Within 90 days, their average tenant turnover had dropped by 22%. I remember the day we pulled that number from the data. I was sitting at our kitchen table at 11 at night. I stared at it for a long time. Then I went and woke up Ren and showed her the screen without saying anything. She said, "That's real." "Yes," I said. "It's real." I said nothing to my family. My mother called every few weeks, as she always had, and the calls followed a predictable pattern. She would ask if I was still at the nonprofit. I would say yes, I was still working there. She would mention that my brother was expanding the hardware store into a second location. She would say my father's knees were bothering him. She would suggest, gently but not gently, that family businesses were more stable than experiments. I would say I understood. I would hang up and go back to work. Being underestimated, I had learned, is a resource. It means no one is watching you closely enough to interfere. We expanded to Richmond 8 months later. 26 property managers, tenant turnover down 19%, average renewal rate up 31%. We had real numbers now, real data from 2 real cities, and I started quietly putting together a pitch deck. The first investor meeting I took was with a small venture capital firm in Charlotte that focused on PropTech, property technology. I drove there in a car that needed a new alternator and had the mechanic's invoice on my passenger seat as a reminder of what failure looked like up close. The partner I met with was a man I will call the partner, because I have no desire to give him any credit for what happened next. He listened to my presentation. He looked at my numbers. He looked at me. He said, "This is interesting, but mid-market residential isn't where smart capital is going right now." He said it the way my mother had said ideas. Politely, conclusively, as if I should be grateful for the clarity. I drove home and revised the deck. The second meeting went differently. It was a firm in Atlanta that had backed 2 healthcare software companies and 1 agricultural technology company. They were looking to diversify into PropTech. The partner who took my meeting was a woman who had founded and sold a company in her 30s and had opinions about mid-market residential that were specific and informed. We talked for 2.5 hours. At the end, she said she wanted to bring me back for a partner meeting. 3 weeks later, Landmark Collective closed a seed round of $600,000. I was standing in a parking garage in Atlanta when the wire confirmation came through on my phone. I called Ren. She answered on the first ring. I didn't say anything for a moment. She said, "Did it go through?" I said yes. She made a sound I had never heard her make before. I want to be honest about what I did next because I think it matters for understanding the rest of this story. I called my mother. Not to brag, not to prove anything yet. I called because I had been lying by omission for 14 months and some part of me, some stubborn, hopeful part, wanted her to know that her daughter had done something real. She listened to the news, $600,000 seed round, prop tech company, 2 cities, pilot results, and she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Is this the kind of money where you actually make money, or is it other people's money that you have to pay back?" I explained that it was equity investment, that investors take a stake in the company. She said, "So you still don't have a salary?" I said, "I have a salary now actually. I'm paying myself." She said, "How much?" I told her. She said that was less than my brother made in his first year managing the second hardware store location, which had not opened yet. I said, "I know, but it'll grow." She said, "I hope so, sweetheart. I really do. But you might want to think about whether this is the right time to take real risks. You're not getting any younger." I was 28 years old. I hung up the phone in that parking garage, and I made a second decision, cleaner than the first one. I was not going to share another milestone with my family until the milestone was large enough that sharing it was no longer vulnerability. It was announcement. The next 18 months were the hardest of my professional life. We scaled from 2 cities to 7. Raleigh, Richmond, Boise, Chattanooga, Spokane, Tulsa, and Knoxville. We hired 12 full-time employees. We rebuilt the software platform twice because the architecture we started with couldn't handle the load. I slept poorly for most of that period. Ren and I fought sometimes about the pace, about the risk, about the fact that we had put her savings into this. And there were nights when the burn rate kept me awake until 3 a.m. doing arithmetic in my head. There was a period in month 22 where everything almost broke. We had been in conversation with a regional property management company, I will call them the regional firm, about a partnership that would have expanded our platform to their portfolio of 400 properties across the South. It was the deal that would have made our Series I fundraising inevitable. The regional firm's CEO was enthusiastic. Their technology director was enthusiastic. We had been in conversations for 3 months. Then the conversation stopped. I found out why through a contact I had at a property management conference in Nashville. The regional firm had quietly been approached by a consultant, an independent advisor in the commercial real estate space, who had suggested they look carefully at the legal structure of Landmark Collective before committing to a partnership. The consultant had expressed concerns about the company's stability and the founder's lack of industry background. I had never met this consultant. I asked my contact where he had gotten involved. My contact said, "I think someone referred him to the regional firm's CEO, someone in their network." I spent 2 weeks trying to find out who. I eventually traced it imperfectly through enough second-hand conversations to believe, though I could not prove that the referral had come through a family friend of my parents. Someone who knew my family, knew my brother was in real estate adjacent business, and had decided either on their own or at someone's suggestion to protect the industry from an unknown quantity. I don't know to this day whether my mother knew. I have chosen not to ask, because the answer would change something I'm not sure I want changed. What I know is that the deal fell apart. Our Series A timeline got pushed by 6 months, and we burned through the last of our seed capital, getting to break even on the existing 7 cities. I remember sitting in our office in Asheville. We had rented a small space by then, 4 desks and a whiteboard. The night I understood the extent of it, Ren came in with 2 coffees and sat across from me. She didn't ask me how I was feeling. She asked me what the next move was. That was the right question. The next move was to stop relying on any network connected to my family's world. We were done with the Southeast for fundraising. We were going national. I spent 6 weeks revising the pitch for a new round. We had strong data by that point. 7 cities, 340 property managers on the platform, average turnover reduction of 24% across the portfolio, a net promoter score that any software company would have envied. I put every number in the deck. I stopped softening the story. I started leading with the data and let the data be as aggressive as it actually was. We flew to San Francisco. I had 1 meeting scheduled with a fund that specialized in marketplace software. The partner who took our meeting was thorough, skeptical, and fair. She asked hard questions about unit economics and about our path to the top 25 markets. I had answers to all of them. At the end, she said she wanted to schedule a follow-up with her full team. The follow-up turned into a term sheet. The term sheet turned into a Series A of $4.2 million. I want to tell you about the moment I signed that term sheet, because it was not what I expected it to be. I expected to feel triumphant. Instead, I felt something quieter and more specific. I felt the weight of everyone who had ever suggested that the plan was too thin, the market too small, the founder too inexperienced, and I felt that weight leave. Not in a dramatic way, more like how a headache fades. You don't notice the exact moment it's gone, you just notice at some point that you're not bracing for pain anymore. We moved fast after that. 14 cities by the end of that year, then 20, then 31. We hired a VP of sales who had spent a decade at a major property management software company and understood exactly how saturated the enterprise market was and exactly how wide open the mid-market was. We brought on a chief technology officer who rewrote our infrastructure in 9 months and cut our response time by 63%. And we started attracting attention, the kind of attention I had originally wanted. Industry press, conference invitations, inbound interest from investors started arriving. I gave an interview to a prop tech newsletter that got forwarded widely. I was asked to speak on a panel at a real estate technology conference in Chicago. I accepted. I did not tell my family about any of it. My mother called during this period with her usual frequency. The conversations were the same. My brother's hardware chain had expanded to 5 locations. My father's knees were better. She asked if I was still doing the property app. I said yes. She said she hoped it was going well. I said it was. There was nothing untrue in any of that. What was happening quietly was that Landmark Collective had become attractive to larger players. The acquisition conversation started, as these things often do, through an intermediary. A broker who specialized in PropTech M&A reached out in late spring of last year. He represented a private equity-backed property management company, one of the largest regional operators in the country, that had been looking for a technology acquisition to strengthen their platform. They had looked at 6 companies. We were the one they kept coming back to. I went into those conversations with one goal: find out if this was serious, and if it was, let the numbers do the talking. The numbers were serious. After 5 months of diligence, negotiation, and 2 rounds of revised offers, we agreed on a final acquisition price of $1.8 billion. I am going to pause on that number because I think it deserves a moment. $1.8 billion. For a company that started with $45,000 and a legal pad. For a company that was told it was targeting the wrong market. For a company whose founder was told at an engagement party in Georgia that she had ideas. The deal closed on a Tuesday in March. It was raining in Asheville. Ren and I signed the final documents in our lawyer's conference room, and afterward we walked to a diner 2 blocks away and ordered breakfast food, even though it was 2 in the afternoon, because neither of us had eaten properly in 3 days. The Wall Street Journal story ran the following Friday. I had not tipped them off. The deal was public record. They found it. My aunt sent me the screenshot at 6:43 in the morning. 3 question marks. I put the phone face down and finished my coffee. Then my brother called. He's not a man who calls without reason, and he's not a man who is comfortable with uncertainty, so his voice was careful, measured, trying to sound like congratulations, when I think what he was actually feeling was something more complicated. He said, "I saw the article." I said, "I figured." He said, "Why didn't you tell us?" And I thought about how to answer that honestly without being cruel, because cruelty was never the point. The point was never to hurt anyone. The point was to build something real and to protect the building of it from people who would have interfered, not out of malice necessarily, but out of that particular kind of love that looks like doubt. I said, "I learned a long time ago that some things grow better in the dark." He didn't respond to that. After a moment he said, "Mum wants to talk to you." My mother came on the line. She was quieter than I had ever heard her. Not sad, exactly. More like she was choosing her words with a care she did not usually apply to conversations with me. She said, "I didn't know it was like this. I said, I know. She said, I said things to you. At the party and after. I said things that weren't, I don't know that they were fair. I said no, they weren't. She said, I'm proud of you. I want you to know I'm proud of you. And here is the thing about that moment that I was not prepared for. I believed her. She meant it. She was not performing pride for an audience or trying to reclaim something she had forfeited. She meant it the way people mean things when they have been genuinely surprised by something, when reality has arrived and rearranged what they thought they knew. I said, thank you, Mum. I meant that too. We talked for another 20 minutes, which was longer than most of our calls in the previous 5 years combined. She asked about Ren. She asked where we were going to live now. She asked, and this was the question that stayed with me, she asked if I had been scared. I thought about the engagement party, the powder room mirror, the parking garage in Atlanta, the nights I couldn't sleep, the deal that fell through, the 6 weeks rewriting a pitch deck in a 4-desk office in Asheville. I said, yes, almost the whole time. She said, that doesn't sound like nothing to be proud of either. No, I said, I don't think it is. The weeks after the acquisition closed were strange in the way that endings always are when you have spent years running towards something. Landmark Collective continued as a subsidiary. I stayed on in an advisory role for the transition period. Ren and I talked for a long time about what came next. My brother, for his part, called again a few weeks later, not to rehash anything, to ask if I would look at a proposal his business partner had put together about expanding the hardware chain into an e-commerce component. He wanted my honest opinion. I told him I would look at it. I did. I gave him my honest opinion, which was that the proposal had a good instinct, but the wrong execution, and I told him specifically why. He thanked me. He said, I should have asked you things a long time ago. I don't know what to do with that exactly. I don't think it requires a response. Some acknowledgements aren't questions. They're just the sound of someone figuring out something they could have figured out sooner. Arriving late but arriving. My father called me once about a month after everything. He is not a phone call person. He is a show-up person, a hand-on-the-shoulder person, and calling me directly was an unusual thing for him to do. He talked for a while about the hardware stores, about a supplier he had been working with for 20 years, about my brother's new location in Hendersonville. Then he said, I want you to know I never thought you couldn't do it. I just didn't know what it was you were doing. I said, I know, Dad. He said, I should have asked. I said, yes, but it's okay. And it was okay, not because the past 5 years hadn't been what they were. Not because the things said at that engagement party hadn't landed where they landed and done what they did, but because okay can coexist with all of that. Because I am 32 years old and I built something worth $1.8 billion from a legal pad and $45,000 and the conviction that the market was wrong, and I did it while my family thought I was playing around with a property app. And the doing of it, the actual work of it, was mine in a way that nothing that came easily would ever have been. The WSJ article ran a follow-up piece 2 weeks later. They quoted an analyst who said Landmark Collective had identified a market inefficiency that larger firms had systematically overlooked for a decade. I cut that one out and put it on our refrigerator. Ren asked me why that one, specifically. I said, because someone who didn't know me looked at the work and saw what I saw. She said, does that feel different than the people who know you seeing it? I thought about it for a moment. I said, yes, it feels like proof. She nodded like she understood, because she did. The real truth, the one I keep coming back to, is this. The engagement party was the beginning, not of the wound. I had been carrying that particular wound for years before anyone said it out loud, but of the decision. The decision to stop waiting for permission to be taken seriously and to simply become too obvious to ignore. 5 years, $45,000, $1.8 billion, and my mother's voice on the phone, quieter than I had ever heard it, saying, I didn't know it was like this. That's the whole story. That's all of it. I've thought a lot about what it actually costs to be underestimated by the people who were supposed to believe in you first. Not the abstract version of that, not the motivational poster version where the doubt just makes you stronger and everything resolves cleanly, but the real version, The version where you're standing in a parking garage in Atlanta waiting for a wire confirmation that may or may not come, and you're doing the math in your head for the 4th time that week on what failure would actually mean for Ren and for everyone who took a chance on you. That version isn't romantic. It's just hard. What I know now, having come out the other side of it, is that the hardship was not the point. The hardship was not secretly good for me in some cosmic ledger-balancing way. What was good for me was the decision I made in that powder room at my brother's engagement party, the decision to stop needing permission from anyone to take my own work seriously. That decision didn't come from the difficulty, it came from me. I made it, and I kept making it every morning for 5 years, in every city, in every pitch room, every time someone suggested the market was wrong or the founder was inexperienced or the company was too small to matter. There's something I want to say about integrity, because I think it gets misunderstood. Integrity isn't just about being honest with other people, it's about being honest with yourself, about what you actually see, and then acting on it even when everyone around you is suggesting you're seeing it wrong. I saw something real in that mid-market rental data. I saw it clearly, and the most important thing I did in those 5 years wasn't the fundraising or the scaling or the acquisition. It was refusing to let other people's confidence in their own certainty override my confidence in what I could actually observe. That's not stubbornness, it's discernment. There's a difference. Stubbornness ignores new information. Discernment evaluates it. Every time someone pushed back on the model, every investor who passed, every deal that fell through, every phone call with my mother where she asked if I was still doing the property app, I evaluated the feedback. I kept what was useful. I let go of what was just noise from someone who hadn't looked at the data as closely as I had. Ren asking me, what's the next move on the worst night of that whole stretch? That's the question I keep coming back to. Not, are you okay? Not, should we quit? What's the next move? That question is what resilience actually sounds like when it comes from someone who respects you enough to skip the comfort and go straight to the work. I am grateful for it every single day. And my mother on the phone after the Journal ran the story saying, I didn't know it was like this. I want to be honest about what I felt when she said that. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt sad, briefly, for both of us. Sad for all the years where she didn't know because I had learned not to tell her. Sad that we got to this moment the way we did, instead of some easier way. But also, and this is the part that surprised me, I felt something close to relief. Because she meant it, she wasn't performing. She was genuinely seeing me, maybe for the first time in a long time, and choosing to say so. That's not nothing. That's actually everything that was ever worth wanting. The $1.8 billion is a number. It will always be just a number. What it represents. 5 years of showing up every single day for something I believed in before anyone else did. That's mine in a way that can't be acquired or transferred or taken. You can build something like that too. The only requirement is that you decide, in some quiet moment when no one is watching, that what you see is worth trusting. And then you keep deciding it. Every day, until the numbers catch up with what you already knew.